told me the job would be easy. Keep the light on, record the weather, stay awake through the night. Simple enough for anyone who's never been here. Blackwater Lighthouse stands 3 miles off the coast, surrounded by fog so thick it feels alive. The locals warned me, follow the rules or you'll end up like the others. I laughed, thought it was just another ghost story, but the first night, I realized the rules weren't a joke. They were a warning, and if I want to make it through this week, I'll have to remember every single one of them. My name is Ethan Cole, and I should have died on my first night at St. Helena Lighthouse. It's been months since then, and I'm still not sure if I survived, or if I just became part of whatever this place is. People like to romanticize lighthouse keeping, solitude, peace, the poetry of man against nature. But no one ever tells you what it feels like to stare into the dark ocean at 2 in the morning, knowing something down there is staring back. I took the job out of desperation, not passion. My life had been sinking for years, the kind of quiet collapse that doesn't make headlines, just bank notices. My mother's illness drained everything, the bills, the treatments, the nights spent praying for a miracle that never came. By the end, I was left with debt, exhaustion, and the sense that I'd somehow failed both of us. When she died, I sold her house, her car, even her wedding ring, just to stay above water. And when a contractor from the Maritime Restoration Bureau offered me a short-term technical position at triple the normal rate, I didn't ask questions. They sent one email, no interview, no background check, just coordinates and instructions to meet a supply boat at dawn in Portland, Maine. I should have known that anything that easy had strings attached. The boat that came for me wasn't official. The man piloting it never introduced himself. He just nodded when I showed him the email and gestured for me to climb aboard. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're trespassing on your own life. The ocean was calm when we left shore, but halfway out, the fog rolled in, thick, gray, and soundless. It swallowed everything. Even the hum of the motor dulled to a heartbeat. I couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead, but I could feel the lighthouse before I saw it. A vibration, faint, rhythmic, steady, like a pulse. When the fog parted, the tower emerged from the mist, a white skeleton rising from a slab of black rock, surrounded by nothing but endless water. St. Helena Lighthouse, built in 1891, the supply manifest said, but up close it looked older, ancient even. Its metal plating was rusted, its stone foundation eroded like coral. The structure moaned under its own weight when the waves hit. The ferryman didn't speak as he docked. I stepped onto the platform, my boots clanging on the steel grating. The air smelled of salt and electricity. Before I could thank him, he pushed a crate toward me and said, 2 weeks' rations, pickups every other Friday. I asked, who'll be coming next time? He didn't answer. He just stared past me toward the tower and muttered, keep the light alive, before turning the boat around. The words stuck with me. Keep the light alive. I watched the boat disappear into the fog. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own breathing echo off the walls of the lighthouse. Inside, everything was colder. The stairwell spiraled upward into darkness, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. The only sound was the slow creak of metal as the wind pressed against the tower. I climbed until I reached the living quarters. A small circular room with 2 bunks, a generator monitor, and a cracked window overlooking the endless gray. That's where I met Marcus Hale. He looked like he belonged here. Early 40s, weathered skin, eyes the color of the sea after a storm. He was sitting at a steel desk, polishing what looked like an antique revolver. When he noticed me, he smiled like someone who'd been waiting for years. "You must be the new hand," he said. His voice carried an odd warmth. "Welcome to St. Helena. Not much of a welcome committee, I'm afraid." He stood and offered his hand. His grip was firm but dry, too dry, like paper left too long in the sun. "I'm Ethan," I said. "They told me I'd be working under you." "Not under," he corrected. "Alongside. We keep the place running, that's all. Systems maintenance, supply inventory, lens rotation. Easy work if you follow the rules." I laughed a little. "Rules." Marcus set the revolver down and looked at me. Really looked. "5 of them," he said quietly. "5 rules to survive out here." He turned and began climbing the next flight of stairs, motioning for me to follow. We passed through each level as he explained the layout. First floor, storage and fuel drums. Second, generator and sonar room. Third, living quarters. Fourth, watch deck. Fifth, lamp room, where the beacon sat, spinning behind thick glass panels. He stopped on the 4th floor and pointed toward the window. Outside, the light beams swept slowly across the fog, slicing it apart for a few seconds at a time. "The first rule," he said, his tone shifting, "keep the light alive, no matter what." He didn't smile when he said it. His eyes tracked the beam like a priest, watching over a sacred flame. I thought he was being dramatic, but that night I understood. The shift began at 8 p.m. My job was simple: monitor the generator, check the pressure seals, and make sure the light rotated every 45 seconds. I ran diagnostics on the control board. Everything looked clean. The sound of the beam turning was almost hypnotic, a deep mechanical hum that made the tower feel alive. Then, just after midnight, the hum stopped. It wasn't a flicker or a power dip. It just stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. The air seemed to thicken. My breath felt heavy. I checked the generator, still running, power flow stable. But the lens motor above me wasn't moving. I climbed to the lamp room, flashlight in hand. When I opened the hatch, the smell of ozone hit me, sharp, metallic. The beacon light was dead, but the glass panels were warm to the touch, almost vibrating. And outside the window, far beyond the mist, a shape moved across the water. It was enormous, darker than the ocean itself, gliding just beneath the surface. I couldn't make out a form, only the motion, slow, purposeful. Then, from below, I heard something, a sound that I can still hear if I close my eyes, a hum, deep and resonant, coming not from the machinery, but from the sea itself. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, like breathing. The light came back on by itself 30 seconds later. The hum stopped instantly. The waves returned to normal. When I went back down, Marcus was standing in the doorway, fully dressed, holding a flare gun. "You saw it," he said. "I don't know what I saw." He nodded slowly. "You don't have to know. Just remember the first rule." He stared up toward the light as it spun again, washing his face in white. "Keep the light alive," he repeated. That was my first night, and it was the last time I ever thought of this job as simple, because from that moment on I realized something terrifying. The light wasn't warning ships away. It was keeping something in. The next morning, sunlight bled through the fog like something reluctant to exist. It wasn't real sunlight, more a pale smear that barely touched the glass. I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark shape under the water, the slow motion of it gliding beneath the waves like it owned them. Marcus was already awake, sitting at the small metal table with a cup of instant coffee and a stack of maintenance logs. He didn't say good morning. He just looked at me over the rim of his mug and said, "You logged it?" Yeah, I said. "Generator check, light failure, manual restart." But the system came back on its own. He nodded once, the kind of nod that said, "That's what it always does." I waited for him to say more, but he went back to reading. His face didn't show much. No fear, no curiosity, just tired patience. After breakfast, we began our daily routine. The lighthouse was like a machine that constantly needed reassurance. Each part whined for attention. Bolts loosening from sea air, cables stiff with corrosion, instruments flickering in and out from the damp. There was no glamour in it, only noise and repetition. The sonar room was my favorite part. It smelled of oil and ozone, and the hum of the screens was steady, alive. The interface was old. 80s era analog mixed with newer tech that someone had grafted onto it. Marcus said the sonar grid extended several miles around the base of the island, scanning both surface and trench levels. The trench itself dropped deeper than any official map recorded. Over 12,000 feet, according to the last calibration. It shouldn't have been that deep, not this close to the continental shelf. "What's down there?" I asked. Marcus didn't look up. "Depends who you ask." "And if I'm asking you?" He smiled faintly. "Pressure, silence, and the kind of things that prefer not to be seen." That was the first time I noticed the small brass medallion hanging from his neck. It looked like an old coin etched with a symbol that reminded me of a compass, but the directions were wrong. The north point was twisted, bent toward one side. "What's that?" I asked. "Charm," he said simply. "Old habit. The sea's got a memory. Better to wear something that remembers you back." He didn't explain, and I didn't push. By the third day, I had settled into a rhythm. Morning checks, system maintenance, evening reports. But something about the tower felt off. The temperature changed from floor to floor. Sometimes the walls hummed as if current was running through them. Once, while checking the lower generator seals, I heard footsteps above me, heavy, deliberate. When I climbed up, Marcus was asleep in his bunk. That night, the fog came in heavier than before. The beam of the light barely cut through it, glowing like a halo trapped in milk. I stood on the watch deck, listening to the ocean. Normally you'd hear the crash of water against rock, the moan of wind through the railing. But that night, nothing. No sound. The silence was so thick it felt alive. Then something struck the tower. It wasn't violent, just a single deep thud, like a palm pressed against metal. The entire structure shuddered. Marcus appeared beside me in seconds, flashlight in hand. "Where?" "Below," I said. "The base, maybe." He didn't hesitate. We descended the stairs 2 at a time until we reached the maintenance hatch near the foundation. The air down there was colder, sharp with salt. The waves were low, steady. The only sound was the gentle slap of water against steel supports. I leaned over the platform, scanning the dark water with my flashlight. "Nothing," I said. Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at the water with an expression I couldn't read, half awe, half recognition. "Marcus," I said quietly. "What was that?" He finally spoke. "It knocks sometimes." "What do you mean it knocks?" He turned the flashlight off. The darkness swallowed everything. "When the light falters, it knocks to remind us it's there." He said it like it was routine, like thunder before rain. Then he climbed back up the stairs, leaving me with nothing but the echo of my heartbeat and the memory of that single impact reverberating through the metal. I didn't sleep that night. By the end of the first week, the supply boat came again. Same man, same silence. He unloaded the crates, left a new stack of batteries, canned food, and a printout of system status, all normal. I asked him if he'd ever seen the light go out. He looked up at me, his face half hidden by fog, and said, "It never stays off for long." Then he pushed the boat away from the dock and vanished into the mist. That evening, Marcus started drinking early. He wasn't sloppy, just quiet, staring at the glass like it might answer something. "You ever wonder why this job pays so much?" he asked suddenly. I shrugged. "Remote location, harsh conditions, government hazard bonus," he chuckled. "That's what I told myself too, until I found the old logbooks." He reached under his bunk and pulled out a weathered leather binder. The pages were stiff and yellowed, filled with tight handwriting that looked older than the tower itself. "Keepers before us," he said. "They didn't just record maintenance, they wrote what they saw." I skimmed the entries. Some were technical, pressure checks, fuel levels, but others were stranger. One note read, "Light failed at 200, heard knockin' from below, repaired motor, light resumed." Another, "Fog voices again, 2 male, 1 female, couldn't identify source." A third, written in shaking script, "Do not let the light die, it calls them." "Who wrote this?" I asked. "Different men, different decades," Marcus said. "Same warnings." I tried to rationalize it. Maybe cabin fever, maybe superstition. But deep down, a part of me, some instinct buried under all my logic, knew they were right. That night, I double-checked the power feeds and stayed near the control board. Midnight came and went. The beacon turned, steady and bright. For a moment, I thought maybe the first outage had been a fluke. Then the sound returned. The hum, faint at first like the vibration of a tuning fork, rising slowly until it filled the walls. My teeth ached from it. The screens flickered, data scrolling faster than the processor could keep up. "Marcus," I shouted. He was already running down from the watch deck, coat half-buttoned, face pale. "Don't touch the controls," he said. "It's reading the light again." "What's it?" He didn't answer. The floor trembled beneath our feet. Dust drifted from the rafters. The hum shifted, lower, slower, like something enormous was breathing beneath the island. The power gauge spiked, then dropped. The beam dimmed. The hum deepened. Marcus grabbed a wrench and slammed it against the main switchboard. Sparks flew. The light surged back to full strength, and just like that, the vibration stopped. Everything went still. We stood there, listening to the soft buzz of electricity, the rotation motor turning again. Marcus was sweating through his shirt. "Next time," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "you don't hesitate. If it goes out, you do whatever it takes to bring it back." He looked me in the eye. "Understand?" I nodded, because I finally did. This wasn't about guiding ships. It wasn't about maintenance or duty or paychecks. It was about containment. Something beneath us wanted the dark, and the light was the only thing keeping it from surfacing. For the next few days, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Logic told me it was mechanical. Pressure resonance, subsonic feedback, power fluctuations. But every explanation I came up with collapsed under its own weight. Machines don't hum like they're alive, and metal doesn't shiver unless it's afraid of something. Marcus pretended nothing had happened. He went about his duties as if the incident had been a dream we shared but agreed to forget. Yet I caught him several times at odd hours standing by the window, whispering under his breath. His lips moved rhythmically, almost like prayer. Once, when I stepped closer, I caught the tail end of it. "Keep her sealed. Keep her sleeping." When he saw me, he turned away sharply and muttered, "Old habit." I didn't push it, but I started watching him more closely after that. The tower became a different place once I started paying attention. There were noises I hadn't noticed before, subtle clicks behind the walls, faint metallic sighs that seemed to move up and down the stairwell. The light flickered sometimes, not enough to trip an alert, but enough to make me glance up every few seconds. I found myself pacing during night shifts, walking the full spiral of the lighthouse again and again, just to keep my nerves busy. Sometimes I'd stop and listen. The ocean had rhythms of its own. The slow crash of waves, the hiss of spray, the distant groan of rock shifting under pressure. But sometimes something didn't fit that rhythm. A pause that was too deliberate, a sound that echoed when it shouldn't. By the 10th day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to dig. The maintenance manuals only told half the story. So I started searching the storage room for older records, blueprints, inspection files, anything that might explain the strange architecture of the lighthouse. That's when I found the box. It was buried behind a stack of unused wiring coils, marked simply Archives. Inside were rolled blueprints, some so brittle they tore when I unrolled them. Most matched the current structure, but one set didn't. The date read 1879. The notes were handwritten, not typed. The design was similar, but there was an extra level drawn beneath the foundation, a hollow chamber labeled Base Access, Restricted. There was no mention of it anywhere in the modern schematics. That night, I asked Marcus about it. He froze halfway through pouring himself coffee. "Where did you find that?" he asked. "In storage," I said. "What's Base Access?" He set the mug down slowly. "Old plans. Doesn't exist anymore." "Then why is it on the drawing?" He met my eyes. "Because the first tower didn't collapse like they say. It was buried." "Buried?" He nodded. "Storms took part of it, sure. But the foundation remained. They built this one right on top of it. Concrete over stone, stone over something else. A seal." He paused. "We're not just maintaining light here, Ethan. We're holding the door shut." His voice was calm, almost clinical. Too calm. I stared at him. "You sound like you believe that." He took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes on the floor. "I don't have to believe it. I've seen what happens when the light dies." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. But from that moment, the idea rooted itself in my mind. Maybe the tower wasn't built to warn ships about danger. Maybe it was built to contain it. That evening the storm came. It started without warning. No build-up, no distant thunder. Just wind roaring against the tower, shaking every bolt loose. Rain hit like gravel. The power grid flickered, alarms blaring. I ran to the generator room, checking gauges, rerouting circuits. Marcus was on the upper deck, shouting updates through the intercom. The light kept turning, slower, weaker. The storm outside sounded like chaos, but beneath it there was another sound, a deeper one, like the same hum from before, buried inside the thunder. I could feel it in my chest, not sound, but vibration. "Marcus," I yelled into the radio. "I'm reading a surge from below the base." "Keep it steady," he barked back. "Don't let the motor stall." But it wasn't the motor. The sonar was pinging erratically, screen full of static, coordinates shifting like it was tracking something alive. The depth readings fluctuated, 5,000 feet, 6, then back to 12. It was as if something enormous was moving upward through the trench. I grabbed the handheld sonar scanner, switched to manual, and pointed it toward the ocean beyond the dock. The readout went wild. Pulsing red, range maxed out, then flatlined. Then came the impact. It hit the base again, harder this time. The tower groaned, lights flickering. Somewhere below, I heard the sound of metal twisting, the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop. Marcus came running down the stairs, coat soaked, hair plastered to his forehead. "It's awake," he said. "We need to stabilize the light." "What are you talking about? What's awake?" He didn't answer. He bolted to the main circuit panel and began rerouting power directly to the beacon's motor, bypassing safeties. Sparks shot from the cables. The lights dimmed, then flared white. I could smell burning insulation, ozone, and something else. Salt mixed with something organic, like brine and decay. "Marcus, you're overloading it," I shouted. "It doesn't matter," he yelled back. "It has to see the light." The entire tower was trembling now. My teeth rattled. The sound from below was louder, closer. The fog outside had turned black, swirling against the glass like smoke underwater. For one terrifying second, I thought I saw an outline, a curve, a massive eye reflecting the beam. Then the power surged, and the light blazed to life. The hum stopped instantly. Everything went silent. The storm outside still raged, but the sound from below was gone. The vibration vanished. The tower steadied itself, the metal creaks fading into the sound of rain again. Marcus slumped against the wall, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. "That's it," he whispered. "It's done. We're safe." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But later, when I went to check the systems, I found something the sensors hadn't logged before. A spike in energy directly under the foundation. For 30 seconds, the pressure readings had doubled. Something massive had moved beneath us and then gone still again. When I told Marcus, he just stared at me for a long time, eyes empty, then said softly, "Then it's not over." I didn't sleep that night either. I sat by the window, watching the beam sweep the fog. Every 45 seconds, the light returned. A pulse, a heartbeat, the only thing separating me from whatever was below. I thought about my mother, about all the nights I'd wished for silence, peace, stillness. Now I had it, and it felt like a cage. Somewhere deep down, I began to realize that Marcus wasn't telling me everything. The lighthouse wasn't just a job site, it was a secret, an experiment maybe, or a prison built to hold something that should never have been found. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which of us it was built to contain, whatever was beneath the waves, or the men who stayed to guard it. The storm finally broke just before dawn, leaving the air thick and heavy. The ocean looked calmer than it had any right to, too calm, as if it was waiting for something. Marcus hadn't come down from the watch deck in hours. I found him standing by the window, still in his soaked jacket, staring toward the horizon. The light from the beacon painted his face in pulses of white. For a moment, I thought he was asleep with his eyes open. "It's quiet," he said without turning. "Yeah," I replied cautiously. "Too quiet." He nodded slowly. "That's how it starts." I waited for him to explain, but he didn't. His reflection in the glass looked older than it had the day before. Pale, drawn, hollow around the eyes. There was a weariness to him that went deeper than fatigue. I finally said, "You knew that would happen last night, didn't you? The surge, the vibration, you've seen it before." He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost lost under the hum of the motor. "There was another keeper before me. His name was Sam. He didn't last 3 months. The logbook said he fell from the observation deck during a storm." Marcus turned from the window, his eyes locking onto mine. "He didn't fall, Ethan. He jumped. The light went out for less than a minute that night. and when it came back on, he wasn't here anymore. I didn't know what to say. There was no fear in his voice, just conviction, like he'd accepted the truth years ago and was tired of carrying it. He motioned for me to follow him down to the generator room. We descended the spiral staircase, each step echoing like a countdown. The deeper we went, the colder the air grew. The walls felt damp. The smell of rust was stronger. Marcus stopped beside the main power conduit and knelt down, unscrewing a rusted access panel. Behind it, rows of wires pulsed faintly with light, like veins glowing beneath skin. He touched them lightly, almost reverently. "Do you hear it?" he asked. I listened. At first nothing, then faintly, a distant pulse. Low, rhythmic, not mechanical, organic. "It's not the generator," I whispered. He nodded. "It's under us. Always has been. The old keeper said the foundation wasn't built on rock. It was fused to something already there, something that hums when the light weakens." I tried to swallow the dread building in my throat. "And you're telling me that's what the light keeps contained?" Marcus looked up, his expression unreadable. Not contained. Calm. We stood in silence for a long time. The pulse continued beneath our feet, steady, slow, like a massive heartbeat deep within the sea. Finally, he said, "You ask me why this job pays so much. It's because no one stays long enough to cash their checks." I let out a nervous laugh that didn't sound like me. "So why are you still here?" He smiled faintly. "Because I've seen what happens when no one is." He replaced the panel, then turned toward the stairwell. "Come on, it's time to check the rotation." We climbed back up to the lamp room. The morning light outside was thin and silver, almost peaceful. The beacon continued its endless sweep, 45 seconds per turn. I leaned against the console, trying to convince myself I was imagining the pulse still echoing in my bones. Marcus sat down, rubbing his temples. "You'll get used to it," he said quietly. "Used to what?" "The sound of it breathing. The tower syncs with it after a while. That's how you know you're part of it." I didn't answer. I just stared at the horizon. The fog was lifting, but something about the water below the lighthouse felt wrong. A faint shimmer, like heat distortion, rippling just beneath the surface. Then, without warning, the light stuttered. The console alarms went off instantly. The beacon froze mid-rotation. The beam cut through the fog once, then died completely. "Not again," I muttered, rushing to the controls. Marcus was already moving, yanking open the emergency cabinet. "Manual override," he barked. I flipped the primary switch. Nothing. Power output 0. Generator online, but no current flow. The hum from below returned, louder this time, shaking the floor beneath us. "It's feeding again," Marcus shouted over the noise. "The light's down too long." I grabbed the backup crank, a massive steel handle that could manually rotate the lens housing. "What do I do?" "Turn it," he yelled, "as fast as you can." I threw my weight against the handle. The mechanism resisted, then groaned to life. The lens began to turn, creaking like something ancient waking from sleep. Sparks flew from the contact rails. The air smelled of metal and salt. The hum outside deepened. The walls vibrated. From the corner of my eye, I saw the water around the base start to swirl, a dark circle forming in the waves, widening with every rotation of the crank. "Faster!" Marcus shouted. I turned harder. The beam flickered once, twice, then ignited in a blinding flash. The hum cut off. The swirling water flattened. The air itself seemed to sigh in relief. For several seconds, no one moved. The only sound was the slow, mechanical click of the beacon resuming its cycle. Marcus sank against the wall, breathing hard. His face was pale, almost gray. "You did good," he said. "You kept it alive." I collapsed onto the floor beside him, my hands trembling. What the hell was that? He looked toward the window. The beam swept across the ocean again, steady and strong. "That," he said, "was your first test. The tower listens. It knows when it's got a new keeper, and it always wants to see what you'll do when the light goes out." He gave a dry laugh, the kind that carries no joy. "Now you know why I drink." I didn't laugh. I couldn't. I stared at the beam turning across the gray horizon and realized that my hands were still shaking. My arms ached from the weight of the crank, but my chest felt hollow. Like something inside me had shifted and wouldn't shift back. That night, I wrote in the logbook for the first time, not as a record, but as a warning. Entry 10:02:14 a.m. Light failure. Manual override successful. Cause unknown. Secondary systems unresponsive during event. Noted vibrations beneath foundation. Sound consistent with subsonic resonance or breathing. Conclusion: the first rule is not symbolic. Keep the light alive. When I closed the log, I caught a reflection in the glass of the lamp housing. My own face, ghostly and pale. Behind me, for a split second, I thought I saw another silhouette standing on the stairs, but when I turned, no one was there. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the endless sweep of the light. Every rotation was a heartbeat, every flicker a warning. I finally understood what Marcus meant when he said we were holding the door shut, because now I could feel it too, something pressing back from the other side. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I wondered if the real danger wasn't what was beneath the water, but what the light was keeping awake. If you made it this far, thank you for following along. What happened that night was just the beginning. There are more rules, 5 in all, and each one changed how I understand this place and myself. If you want to hear the rest of the story of the St. Helena Lighthouse, be sure to subscribe and check back often, because once the lighthouse goes out, I'll need someone to remind me how to keep it alive. I stopped counting the days after the second blackout. The routine kept me sane. System checks, light rotation, sonar calibration, maintenance reports. But beneath all of that rhythm, something had changed. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was curiosity. Every sound, every tremor, every flicker of light seemed like a piece of a larger puzzle. And the worst part, I wanted to solve it. Marcus didn't talk much after the last event. He went through motions like a man on autopilot. Eat, repair, sleep, repeat. But I could tell the strain was showing. His hands trembled when he wrote in the logs. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the water for too long, his expression somewhere between reverence and despair. The sea looked normal in the daytime. That was the lie it liked best. Calm, endless, indifferent. But I'd begun noticing patterns in the waves. They didn't always move like they should. Sometimes the ripples would pulse against the wind, bending toward the lighthouse instead of away. One morning, while inspecting the dock after a storm, I found something wedged between the rocks. It was a piece of driftwood, waterlogged and pale, but what caught my attention was the carving on its surface. 5 symbols etched deep into the grain, arranged in a circle. They matched the shape of Marcus's medallion. When I showed it to him, his face went pale. "Where did you find this?" "Below the dock." "Why?" He took it from my hand and traced the carvings with his thumb. "These are markers," he said. "Old ones. Warnings." "Warnings for what?" He hesitated. Things that come up when people forget to look away. I frowned. Look away from what? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked outside and threw the driftwood into the sea. It floated for a moment, then sank straight down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his words. When people forget to look away. By 2 a.m., I gave up trying to rest. I climbed up to the watch deck and leaned against the railing. The fog had cleared. The moonlight stretched over the ocean like a sheet of glass. Everything looked unnaturally still. It was the kind of beauty that invites danger. The water shimmered faintly in the distance, small waves rolling in slow motion. I found myself timing them, tracing their crests as they rose and fell. But the longer I watched, the more wrong it felt. The ripples were forming concentric circles, dozens of them all expanding outward from a single dark point. My pulse quickened. It was mesmerizing, the perfect symmetry, the slow rhythm, like the ocean was breathing in its sleep. Then I saw it, a flicker beneath the surface, not light. Movement, something large coiling just under the water. It didn't move like a fish or a whale. It moved like it was thinking. For a full minute, I couldn't look away. The longer I stared, the slower everything around me seemed to move. The beam of the lighthouse stretched, distorted. The air grew heavy. My chest tightened, my breath coming in shallow bursts. And then, a voice behind me. Don't. Marcus's hand clamped down on my shoulder. He yanked me back from the railing. The spell broke instantly. The motion returned to normal. The waves were just waves again. What the hell, Marcus? I snapped, gasping for breath. You scared me half to death. He didn't apologize. His face was pale, his eyes wide. How long were you watching? I don't know, maybe a minute. He shook his head violently. No, you can't do that. Never that long. He let go of my shoulder and stepped back, trembling slightly. That's the second rule, Ethan. Don't watch the waves for too long. I stared at him. That's ridiculous. What happens if I do? Get seasick. He didn't smile. You start seeing what you're not supposed to, and once you see them, they see you. He walked away without another word, leaving me alone with the sound of the wind and the soft turning of the light. I wanted to dismiss it. Superstition, paranoia, maybe even hallucination. But the next morning I noticed something strange. My wristwatch was wrong. It was running 38 minutes ahead. At first I thought the battery was dying. But when I checked the time on the control board clock, it matched my watch perfectly. I checked the secondary clock. Same. Marcus's too. The entire station had jumped forward 38 minutes overnight. Marcus refused to talk about it. It happens sometimes, he said flatly. We call it the skip. The skip, he nodded. The sea steals time when you stare too long. It sounded insane. But then I remembered the moment before he grabbed me, how the air thickened, how the beam slowed. It hadn't felt like I'd been there for just a minute. It had felt like an hour. That evening I reviewed the sonar logs. The data from the night before was incomplete. Gaps, blank lines, static bursts, where readings should have been. But buried in the noise was a pattern. 3 pulses spaced evenly apart. Depth, variable. Shape, undefined. Location, directly beneath the lighthouse. When I brought it up to Marcus, he just said, "Don't dig into that." I need to understand what's going on, I argued. You won't, he said quietly. Not if you want to stay sane. But I couldn't let it go. Every mystery begs to be solved, and every rule begs to be tested. That night, I did something I shouldn't have. I waited until Marcus fell asleep. Then I climbed back up to the watch deck. The ocean was calm again, perfect and silent. I told myself I'd only look for 10 seconds, just enough to see if the circles would form again. 1, 2, 3. By the 6th second, I saw movement. By the 8th, I felt it watching back. And by the 10th, I realized the reflection in the water wasn't mine. At first, I thought I'd just caught my own reflection wrong. The moonlight can play tricks out here, especially when the fog starts to thin. But the face in the water didn't move when I did. It floated a heartbeat out of sync, my own outline, but slower, heavier, eyes too wide and too dark. The mouth opened a fraction of a second after mine and closed a little too late. A lag in reality. I staggered back, heart hammering. The beam swept over the waves and the reflection vanished. The sea went flat again as if nothing had happened. I forced myself to breathe, counted to 10, then went below to the sonar room. The screens glowed pale green in the dark. The only sound the low thrum of the generator. I ran a manual scan, more out of reflex than reason. Ping, ping, then 3 returns, slow, measured, exactly like before. Depth fluctuating between 11,900 and 12,200 feet. Shape undefined. Movement vertical. The machine recorded each pulse. Time stamped 02:43 a.m., 2:43 a.m., 2:43 a.m. 3 different readings, all marked the same second. That made no sense. I saved the file and printed the waveform. Each pulse had the same harmonic pattern, but the amplitude spiked into frequencies the sonar shouldn't even register. Subsonic waves that could shake bone. I felt them through the floor before I heard them. The air began to vibrate. Then Marcus's voice behind me. "You looked again, didn't you?" I jumped. "Jesus, you can't just sneak up." He cut me off with a glare. "You looked." I hesitated. "Maybe for a second." He sighed, long and low, and rubbed his face. "That's how it starts. First the reflection, then the echo." "The echo." He pointed at the sonar screen. "That. You're not just getting readings, you're getting yourself back. The sea repeats whoever stares into it." "That's impossible." He leaned close, eyes hollow. "Tell that to the keepers who heard themselves knocking from below." The words hit harder than I wanted them to. Marcus shut down the console and killed the lights. The room dropped into darkness, only the glow from the hallway leaking in. "You need to sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we reset the grid." He left before I could argue, but I didn't sleep. I sat there in the dark, listening to the residual hum of the sonar. It pulsed every 45 seconds, perfectly timed with the lighthouse beam. I realized the 2 systems were syncing, the light above and the signal below, like call and response. At 3:17 a.m., the printer spat out one more sheet by itself, just a single line across the page. A note that hadn't been there before: "Stop watching us." The letters weren't typed, they were imprinted, as if something heavy had pressed from the inside of the paper outward. I shut the machine off and locked the room. When dawn came, the horizon looked fractured. The sun rose in 2 halves that didn't quite align. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it stayed like that for several minutes before finally merging into one. Marcus noticed me squinting. "Double sunrise?" he asked dryly. "You see it too?" He nodded. "Another side effect. The sea bends time, bends light. You'll get used to it." I almost laughed. "You sound like you're fine with this." "I'm not fine," he said. "I'm alive. There's a difference." Later that afternoon, I went through the older logs again. I wanted evidence, dates, patterns, anything that proved what I saw wasn't madness. Most of the reports before 1987 were routine maintenance, but a few entries stood out. April 12th, the sea stared back tonight. Don't follow your reflection. May 3rd, Marcus H. says the waves hum names now. I heard mine. June 1st, second rule confirmed. 10 seconds is too long. Different handwriting each time, same warning. That evening I tried to record the phenomenon. I set up a small camcorder facing the water and timed myself. 10 seconds on the deck, looking straight into the sea. The footage would prove something, I thought. Either the reflection was real or my mind was. When I played it back, there was nothing for the first 9 seconds. On the 10th, the screen warped, static bleeding across the image. Then a frame freeze, my face staring back. But the mouth moved while mine was still. It whispered something I couldn't hear. The tape cut off at exactly the same timestamp as the sonar pulse. 2:43 a.m. I haven't deleted that clip. I can't, because somewhere in that frozen image, I swear I can see another figure standing behind me on the deck, just before the frame dissolves into noise. I asked Marcus again what really happened to the keepers before us. He didn't lie this time. Some walked into the water, he said. Some jumped. The rest stayed too long and started repeating themselves. You ever hear your own voice echo back a word you haven't said yet? That's when you know it's over. He poured himself another cup of coffee and stared at the swirling liquid. The sea doesn't kill you outright, Ethan. It just makes you forget which side you're on. That night, I caught myself talking to the reflection in the window. Not out loud, just mouthing the words it seemed to form. It smiled before I did. The next few days bled together. I'd wake up at dawn and not know whether it was the same dawn as yesterday. The clocks disagreed with each other. Sometimes the tower bell chimed twice for the same hour. I tried to keep a schedule, coffee, diagnostics, sonar scan, meal, but every loop felt like a copy of a copy, fading around the edges. Marcus stopped marking time altogether. He'd scribble a date in the log, cross it out, and write unsure. His handwriting shook worse than ever. When I asked how long he'd actually been here, he stared at the wall for so long I thought he hadn't heard. Then he said, 3 months, maybe 6. The sea eats the numbers first. The sonar alarms began to trigger at random intervals, always with the same pulse pattern, 3 slow beats. Then silence. I ran manual sweeps each time. The signal rose from the trench, stopped halfway, then sank again, as if testing its own strength. The instruments didn't call it motion, they called it growth. I started tracing the coordinates on a map of the sea floor. Each ping formed a spiral around the base of the lighthouse, an almost perfect circle closing inward. Whatever was down there, it was getting closer. I printed the charts and pinned them on the bulkhead. Marcus tore them down the next morning. Stop feeding it, he said. Feeding what? Data? He shook his head. Attention, that's all it ever wanted. He was trembling, so I didn't push. But the moment he went upstairs, I taped the maps back up and drew the next line. Curiosity isn't bravery, it's hunger, and mine was starting to hurt. That night, at 11:42 p.m., the sonar hit a new register, so low I could feel it in my ribs. The screens blurred, black lines stretching down the glass. The printer spat paper non-stop, reams of gibberish symbols that looked like waveform code until I noticed letters hidden in them. Not random letters either. ETHAN. They repeated in intervals, perfectly aligned with the pulse. I yanked the power cord. The sound stopped. The name didn't. It came from the water, faint, almost swallowed by the surf. But there, My name carried on the wind like it had been there 1,000 times already. Every instinct told me to answer, to shout something back into the night, to prove I was still the one speaking. Instead, I slammed the hatch shut and bolted it. Marcus found me hours later still sitting by the door with the flare gun. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't have to. He just said, "That's how it hooks you. You listen too long, you start hearing yourself from below." He handed me a small copper whistle on a cord. "If it calls again, blow this. The sound cuts the echo." "What if it doesn't stop?" He smiled without humor. "Then you stop listening." By the next morning, fog rolled back in thick as concrete. The world outside the windows vanished. The radio picked up nothing but static, the supply boat overdue by 2 days. The isolation hit different this time. Heavy, electric, like the air before a lightning strike. I turned the radio dial back and forth until, between bursts of static, I heard a single clear phrase. "Don't watch the water." Then silence. No call sign, no repeat. I looked at Marcus. He just whispered, "Rule 2, someone's reminding you." We stayed upstairs through most of that day, both of us pretending to read. Around dusk, the fog began to glow faintly blue, as if lit from underneath. The pulse returned, rhythmic, almost gentle. It wasn't fear I felt. It was a strange calm, the kind that comes right before surrender. I stood, drawn toward the window. "Don't," Marcus said again, but softer this time, like even he wanted to see. The beam swept across the fog. For a split second I saw shapes, curved lines moving just under the surface, hundreds of them, all circling the rock like slow orbiting moons. The reflection of the lighthouse spun across their backs in silver arcs. They weren't fish. They weren't anything that belonged to this scale of ocean. And they were rising. The sonar alarm blared. The screen filled with readings stacked on top of each other until the numbers overlapped into solid black. I shut it off. The sound kept going. The pulse wasn't coming from the machine anymore. It was coming from inside the walls. The metal panels quivered, water condensed and ran down the rivets like sweat. I could hear the pressure changing, the way you can feel altitude in your ears. Marcus gripped the railing. "It's surfacing. Keep the light steady." The lens motor whined. The beam began to slow. I rushed to the control panel and saw the same error code that had flashed before every blackout. Rotation drift. Unknown interference. I hit manual override and cranked the wheel myself. The light steadied for a moment, then dimmed again. The pulse matched it, louder each time the glow weakened. Marcus shouted something I didn't catch. The fog outside split open in a vertical line like a curtain. Beyond it, for one heartbeat, I saw the water's surface bulge outward, a vast dome pushing upward from below. The light caught something metallic beneath the waves, moving with purpose. Then the fog snapped shut, the hum cut off. The tower went still. I realized my hands were bleeding from the pressure of the wheel. Marcus was breathing hard, leaning on the console. "Is it gone?" I asked. He shook his head. "It never goes. It just remembers who looked." That night, every window in the lighthouse sweated seawater from the inside. Drops slid down the glass in perfect rhythm with the beacon's rotation. The air smelled of iron and salt and something faintly electric, like a storm that never ends. I wrote one line in the logbook before the pen ran dry. Rule 2 confirmed, the ocean watches back. The following morning, the sky looked clearer than it had in weeks. The ocean was calm, the air carried no fog, and for the first time since I'd arrived, Sunlight broke through the clouds in steady golden stripes. The world looked ordinary again, almost peaceful. But peace in a place like this always felt like the pause between heartbeats. Marcus was already awake, cleaning tools on the deck. He looked different, focused, steady, maybe even lighter. For a second, I thought the night before had reset him somehow. "Sleep?" he asked. "Barely." He nodded. "Good. You're learning." "Learning what?" He squinted toward the horizon. "That you don't need sleep when something out there doesn't either." I half laughed, trying to diffuse the weight of his words. "You always talk like that. Only when people start staring too long." He handed me a notebook, thin, leather-bound, edges warped from humidity. It wasn't one of the official maintenance logs. "What's this?" I asked. "The real record," he said. "Every keeper keeps one. You'll want to write down what you remember before this place decides to change it." I opened it carefully. The pages were filled with handwriting, some his, some older. The earliest entries went back decades. Most were dated irregularly, as if time didn't matter much here. One note from 1968 caught my attention. "The sea isn't alive. It just remembers everything we drop into it." Another, undated, simply said, "Do not follow your reflection." And below that, in Marcus's own handwriting, second rule confirmed: don't watch the waves too long. The longer you stare, the more it learns your face. I looked up. "You've seen it, haven't you?" He paused his work. "Everyone sees it, once." "What happens if you don't look away?" He hesitated before answering. "You stop seeing the difference between up and down, between here and there. Some never come back from that." There was no fear in his voice, only quiet understanding, the tone of a man who'd already made peace with the things he couldn't control. Later that day, we repaired the outer railing and replaced a section of corroded wiring near the dock. The sun's warmth felt foreign on my skin, as if the world was trying to apologize. But even then, the water reflected too clearly. Every step I took near the edge, I could see my outline moving in the surface below. It didn't feel like a reflection anymore. It felt like someone walking beneath me, imitating every motion half a second late. I tried to ignore it, focus on the work, but by dusk, I could feel that familiar pull again. Not a sound, not a hum, just a quiet invitation. "Ethan," Marcus called from above, breaking the spell. "Pack it in, the sun's down." I looked once more at the sea. For a brief moment I thought I saw two lights glowing faintly beneath the water, like a pair of eyes sinking into the deep. When I blinked, they were gone. We spent that evening running diagnostics, mostly in silence. The sonar system, which had gone wild the night before, now showed clean readings, steady, normal, nothing on the radar, no unusual frequencies. It should have felt like relief, but instead it felt staged, as if the sea itself was pretending to sleep. I turned to Marcus. "You ever wonder if this place is testing us?" He smiled faintly. "Every second." "Testing for what?" "To see who blinks first." He took a sip of coffee, leaned back in his chair, and added softly, "But the trick isn't not blinking. The trick is remembering to open your eyes again afterward." For the first time, I saw something human in him. Not fear, but compassion. He wasn't here because he loved the job. He was here because someone had to be. Before turning in for the night, I stood once more by the window. The sea stretched out endlessly, calm and silver beneath the turning light. I realized that even beauty could be dangerous if you didn't respect it. That maybe the rules weren't about superstition at all, but about survival. When I finally sat down to write in my own notebook, my hand hesitated over the page. I wrote carefully, line by line, as if the act of remembering itself might keep me safe. Rule 2. Don't watch the waves for too long. The ocean doesn't attack. It waits. It learns. And once it knows you, it never forgets. I closed the book and listened to the beam sweep across the water one more time. The sound of the rotation motor was steady, reassuring, a heartbeat in metal and light. That night, for the first time since I arrived, I slept. But just before I drifted off, I heard Marcus whisper from his bunk across the room, barely loud enough for me to catch. "She knows your name now." For a week after the sea went quiet, the silence was the worst part. No hum, no strange pulses, no distortion, just the endless rhythm of waves against the rock. The kind of quiet that made your own heartbeat sound too loud. At first, I thought we'd been given a break, a rare moment of peace. But Marcus didn't trust it. He spent his nights by the radio, tuning through static as if he expected the silence itself to start talking. On the 8th day, it did. I was halfway through recalibrating the sonar when I heard it, faint, buried in the static. A voice. A woman's voice, distant but clear enough to understand. "Ethan, do you read me?" My hands froze on the console. No one outside this lighthouse should have known my name. "Marcus," I called out, "we've got contact." He was already climbing the stairs from the lower deck, coffee in one hand, his expression unreadable. I turned up the volume. The static thinned. Then the voice came again, softer this time, like it was moving away. "Ethan, please answer." It sounded like my mother. My throat tightened. "Did you record this?" I asked. Marcus didn't answer. He reached over, turned the volume down until the voice was almost gone, and said quietly, "That's the 3rd rule." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He met my eyes. "Ignore the voices." He let that sink in, then continued. "They start with names, always names. They'll sound like someone you know, someone you miss, someone who can make you open the door." I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him the signal could have been from a nearby fishing vessel, maybe a civilian band overlapping frequencies. But I couldn't shake how personal it had sounded, how the voice had used the exact tone my mother did when she called me as a kid. The quiet way she said my name when she didn't want to wake anyone else. "I heard her," I whispered. Marcus nodded. "They always pick the one you'll answer." He turned off the radio and walked away. That was it. No explanation, no discussion. The rule was simple, but the way he said it made it feel heavier than any before. That night I dreamt of the sea again. Not violent or dark, just endless, smooth as glass, stretching to the horizon. I stood on its surface, weightless, while something below traced my shadow. When I woke, my pillow was damp with sweat, and the radio light was blinking red. I hesitated before turning it on. Static. Then, faintly, my mother's voice again. "Ethan, sweetheart, are you there?" The words sent a chill down my spine. She hadn't called me sweetheart since I was a teenager. I wanted to believe it was a trick of memory, that maybe I was half dreaming still. "Mom?" I said before I could stop myself. The moment the word left my mouth, the signal cleared. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "You've done so well. You can come home now." My heart hammered. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I forgot about the tower, the waves, even the rules. I leaned closer to the speaker. Then Marcus's voice cut through the static from the stairwell behind me. "Turn it off!" I jumped, almost knocking the radio off the table. "Marcus, it's her," I said. "It sounds exactly like—" "Turn it off." The sharpness in his tone broke whatever hold the sound had over me. I flicked the switch. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the generator. Marcus stood in the doorway, shoulders tense. "They don't stop when you answer. They just get closer." I looked at him. "You've heard them too, haven't you?" He didn't deny it. He just sat down, hands clasped tightly. "The first time I heard one," he said slowly, "it was my brother. He died off Cape Cod 12 years ago. I heard him calling through the fog like he was standing right outside. I almost opened the hatch. Would have walked straight into the sea if I hadn't tripped the alarm." He looked away, his voice lowering. "That's how they take people. Not through fear, through memory." We sat in silence after that. The air between us felt heavy, like the weight of everything we didn't say. I wanted to believe it was some kind of atmospheric anomaly, trapped frequencies, electromagnetic distortion. But deep down, a quieter part of me recognized what Marcus meant. Loneliness has its own gravity. Out here, where every sound echoes and every thought lingers too long, memory can turn into something that feels alive. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the water shimmer under the moonlight. Every so often I thought I heard faint laughter drifting over the waves, carried by the wind. Maybe it was just the metal of the tower expanding in the cold. Maybe not. Before dawn, I wrote another line in my notebook. Rule 3, ignore the voices. The sea remembers what you love, and it will use it to call you home. I closed the book and watched the first light touch the water. The horizon glowed faintly gold, and for a moment it looked peaceful again. But peace here always means something is waiting. By the next morning, the air had changed again. The ocean looked calm, but the fog that clung to the horizon shimmered faintly, as if the sunlight couldn't decide whether to break through or turn back. Marcus said it meant we were in for thin days. "Thin?" I asked. "The world's edges get softer. Sounds travel further, sometimes too far." He was right. Around noon, the radio clicked on by itself. No voice this time, just a long, low tone that climbed and dropped in a slow rhythm, like breathing. Marcus walked over, pressed a hand against the speaker grill, then unplugged the power cord. "Old frequencies," he muttered. "Things the tower remembers." That word again. Remembers. I spent the afternoon searching through the supply archives. Behind a stack of rusted fuel cans, I found a folder stamped Coast Guard, 1973. Inside were faded transmission reports. The most recent entry was labeled Signal 18, Apparent Distress Echo. It described a pattern of radio calls that repeated every few years. Voices identifying themselves as lost mariners, sometimes matching names from ships long confirmed sunk. At the bottom of the page, someone had scribbled in pencil, "Origin, St. Helena Station." I brought it upstairs and laid it on the table between us. "They knew," I said. "They logged this 40 years ago." Marcus read the page slowly. "It's the same thing. Every few years the voices start again, always the same pattern. Each time someone new answers." "Then what?" He closed the folder. "Then the logs stop." That night I couldn't stay away from the radio. I told myself I was only going to listen for interference, nothing more. I set the volume low, just above silence. The static hissed softly like wind over sand. For hours there was nothing. Then, at exactly 1:07 a.m., the tone returned, followed by a faint series of clicks, Morse code. I hadn't practiced in years, but the rhythm was clear, Soscole, my last name. The breath caught in my throat. "Marcus," I called, no answer. His bunk was empty. I hesitated, then switched on the recorder. The message repeated 3 times, then stopped. After a long pause, a new voice came through, rough, older, but unmistakably mine. "Keep the light alive." Then silence. When Marcus returned at dawn, I played it for him. He listened without speaking, then rewound it and listened again. The voice on the tape crackled through the speaker, calm and even. Like a man reading instructions he already knew by heart. "You see why you can't answer," he said quietly. "It learns your tone, your cadence. It can build you from memory." I didn't argue. I just stared at the recorder, feeling the thinness Marcus had described, the way reality itself seemed stretched, transparent at the edges. Later that morning, while checking the generator output, I found a handwritten note taped to the control panel. Not Marcus's handwriting, too neat, too deliberate. "Ethan, North Sector beacon inactive. Manual repair required." We didn't have a North Sector beacon. The nearest auxiliary tower had been decommissioned in the 1980s. Still, curiosity won. I grabbed my coat and went outside. The air was crisp, the water shining silver under a pale sun. No sound but the steady pulse of the main light. Halfway down the metal walkway, a voice carried across the wind. My voice. "Ethan, you're losing time." I froze. It wasn't loud, just clear. Spoken from the direction of the sea. The rational part of my mind screamed echo, reflection, coincidence. But something inside me knew better. I turned back toward the tower. Marcus stood in the doorway, face unreadable. "You got my note," he called. "I thought you—" I started, then stopped. He was holding a wrench, not a pen. He hadn't written anything. When I looked back at the control panel later, the note was gone. That evening, as the light swept across the fog again, Marcus finally explained the third rule. "The voices aren't ghosts," he said. "They're the sea repeating what it's heard. Every sound we make, every word shouted into the wind, it keeps. Sometimes it gives them back. But never quite in the same order. That's why you ignore them. You can't reason with an echo." He leaned against the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon. The men who tried to answer, some jumped, some walked out into the fog thinking they were heading home. The sea doesn't take them. It just doesn't give them back. I watched the beam sweep over the water. For a moment, I thought I saw movement far out where the light faded. Small, distant sparks like radio towers blinking under the surface. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was memory. I didn't turn the radio on again that night. I sat by the window and wrote in the journal instead. The voices sound like comfort, but they're only the wind returning what we've already lost. The trick is remembering which sounds belong to you. After that night, the tower began to sound different. The hum of the generators, the soft clicks of the rotating lens, even the creak of the metal stairs, everything seemed to carry a rhythm that almost felt human, like breathing beneath words you couldn't quite catch. At first I thought it was fatigue. Then I realized I was starting to hear fragments of speech inside the ordinary noise. The echo of my name folded into the whir of the motor, small phrases between the bursts of static when the beacon swept past. It was subtle. So subtle I would have ignored it if Marcus hadn't stopped mid-sentence one afternoon while we were logging data. "You heard that too, didn't you?" he said. "I heard the motor." He shook his head. Not the motor, the voice under it. We stood there, both listening. The light turned overhead, the mechanism clicking through its rotation. Somewhere deep in the tower, the vibration changed pitch. In that hum, hidden between frequencies, a sentence formed so faintly that it might have been imagination. "It's not the sea," Marcus exhaled slowly. "It never is," he said. We shut down the equipment one system at a time, until the only sound left was the wind outside. But even in silence, I could still feel it, something moving inside the walls, a current of air that didn't follow the drafts. The next morning, I ran a full diagnostic. Every circuit checked out. The sonar grid was quiet, the radio dormant, yet the sound persisted, a low pulse that seemed to migrate from room to room. I traced it down to the basement level, to a section of the tower I hadn't paid much attention to before, the old signal relay chamber. The door was half sealed with rust, the metal warped from years of salt air. When I pried it open, the smell of ozone and damp concrete filled the air. Inside, cables hung like vines, some still glowing faintly at their tips. The source of the hum was a small transmitter bolted to the wall, its surface slick with condensation. It wasn't connected to any power supply I could see. I called Marcus. He took one look at it and went very still. "That shouldn't be here," he said. "It's broadcasting," I told him. "Low frequency, steady." He crouched, running a hand along the edge of the casing. The metal was etched with a serial number worn almost flat. "This is pre-automation," he said finally. "Early relay unit. They used them before the tower went digital." "But this one's still active." He didn't answer right away. "Some of the early stations had internal loops," he said at last. "They repeated recorded messages so ships could test their receivers. Maybe that's what this is." I pointed to the faint signal meter blinking green. "Then why is it tuned to our channel?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Because the lighthouse listens as much as it speaks." That night we stayed in the control room, monitoring the frequency. Every few minutes the transmitter pulsed, sending a pattern of tones through the line. Short, long, long, short. It repeated endlessly until just before dawn, the pattern shifted into something almost melodic, a rhythm we both recognized. 45 seconds on, 45 off. The same as the rotation of the light. "The signal's linked to the beacon," I said. Marcus rubbed his eyes. "Everything here is." He looked exhausted, but beneath the fatigue there was something else. Acceptance. As if he'd known all along that the boundary between machine and memory had thinned long ago. Later, while he slept, I replayed the recorded transmission. Between the tones hidden under the frequency spikes, I found faint traces of a voice. When I isolated it, the words became clear enough to transcribe. "Don't listen to them, they're not outside." The voice was mine. I shut off the recorder and sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet heartbeat of the tower. Somewhere above me, the lens turned, throwing its beam out across the water, cutting clean lines through fog that might not even be there. When Marcus woke, I didn't tell him what I'd found. I only wrote in the journal, "The sea isn't speaking. The tower is. Maybe it's been speaking all along and we've just mistaken its memory for ghosts." The days that followed were calm. Too calm. The sea flattened into glass, and the wind dropped to a whisper that never changed direction. Routine became the only way to stay grounded. Check the lenses, wipe the condensation, test the power. Marcus and I spoke little. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same unspoken truth. The tower wasn't just broadcasting, it was remembering. Late one afternoon, while cleaning the signal chamber, Marcus set down his wrench and said quietly, "You ever wonder why I took this job?" I looked up. Because no one else wanted it. He smiled at that, but there wasn't much humor in it. My father was a keeper here, the first tower before this one. He disappeared when I was 9. They told my mother a storm took him, but the logbook said otherwise. What did it say? He wiped his hands on a rag, eyes fixed on the window. It said he answered a call. He told me that after his father vanished, the Coast Guard rebuilt the station, new structure, new systems, new rules. They never admitted it, but they designed the protocols around his last entry. Rule 3 came from him. I tried to picture a boy growing up with that kind of legacy, chasing echoes that carried his father's voice. So you came back to finish what he started? To keep it quiet, Marcus said. Someone has to. That night, the wind returned, soft but steady, and for the first time in weeks, the fog cleared enough for us to see the mainland lights faint on the horizon. The world suddenly felt close again, real. I thought maybe that meant whatever was happening was over. Then the radio light blinked red. A single tone filled the room, steady, low, unmistakable. We both froze. The frequency readout pulsed in rhythm with the beacon's rotation. Marcus reached for the dial, but before he could touch it, a voice broke through. Marcus Hale. He went rigid. The voice was calm, familiar, older. Marcus, it said again, it's me. It's your father. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. It's just an echo, I whispered. It's the system. But Marcus's eyes were fixed on the speaker, wide and wet. He called me by name. The voice continued, soft and deliberate. You've done well. You can rest now. The light can take care of itself. I reached for the switch. Marcus, don't. He grabbed my wrist. If it's really him, I can't ignore it. The radio crackled again, louder now. You've kept it alive long enough, son. Let it sleep. Marcus stared at the speaker for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. It's not him, he said finally. He turned off the radio and sank into the chair. It sounds like comfort. That's how it works. We sat in silence until the hum faded completely. Outside, the beam kept turning, 45 seconds on, 45 off. The world went back to its rhythm. Before dawn, I found him writing in his private notebook. When he noticed me, he tore out a page and handed it over. It read, Rule 3 isn't about silence, it's about trust. You have to believe that the people you miss are already home. If you don't, this place will make you believe otherwise. The following evening, the wind shifted, and a light rain began to fall. The tower felt normal again, machines humming, cables singing softly in the draft. Marcus brewed coffee for both of us. We drank in quiet companionship, the kind that comes after surviving something that doesn't need to be named. As I wrote that night's entry, I realized the rules weren't chains. They were lessons. They weren't just warnings about the sea. They were instructions on how to stay human when the world around you forgets what that means. I closed the journal, glanced at Marcus, and said, if the voices start again, we'll ignore them together. He smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him since I arrived. That's the only way it works. Outside, the beacon swept across calm water. For the first time, the sound of the rotation didn't feel mechanical. It sounded like breathing, steady, alive, and at peace. It began with a reflection. The night was unusually still, the kind of stillness that makes every sound feel magnified. The tick of the clock, the hum of the generator, the soft tap of rain against the glass. I was doing the last system check before midnight when Marcus called from the observation deck. "Ethan, you should see this." His tone wasn't alarmed, but it wasn't casual either. I climbed the stairs, clipboard still in hand. At first, I thought I was looking at a mirage, a faint, glowing outline far beyond the fog line. It looked like a ship, though there were no scheduled routes within 50 miles of us. The outline flickered softly, a dull blue light tracing the shape of its hull. "It's not on radar," Marcus said quietly. "It never is." "What is it?" He didn't take his eyes off the horizon. "We call them the dead ships." I waited for him to elaborate, but he stayed silent, watching the light drift across the water. It didn't move like a real vessel. It floated just above the waves, slow and soundless, the fog clinging to it like a second skin. "You've seen them before?" I asked. He nodded. "Every keeper does eventually. They don't always show themselves, but when they do, you keep the light away." "Why?" "Because the light reminds them they're supposed to move." The sentence made no sense, but his voice was steady, matter of fact. I turned to look at the beam rotating behind us, slicing through fog and rain in its endless pattern. Each time it swung near the direction of the ghostly shape, Marcus's hand twitched toward the control lever. Then I understood. He was waiting for the exact moment to block it. "Now," he said. The light was seconds away from sweeping across the horizon where the ship glowed. I grabbed the manual brake and locked it. The gears shrieked in protest. The beam froze mid-rotation, its white arc hovering just short of the apparition. The moment it stopped, the blue outline flickered once, twice, then faded into the fog, like mist being swallowed by darkness. We waited in silence. Then the sound came, not thunder, not wind, a deep groan from below, as if the ocean itself had shifted its weight. The tower creaked. The floor vibrated softly under our feet. After a long minute, it passed. Marcus exhaled. "That's why we don't shine the light on them." I released the brake. The lens resumed its steady rotation, the normal hum returning like a heartbeat, finding rhythm again. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded smaller than I meant it to. "What are they?" He rubbed his jaw, thoughtful. "Some say they're echoes of ships that never made it to shore. Others think they're memories, the sea replaying what it can't forget." "And what do you think?" He turned to me, his expression softer than usual. "I think they're reminders that not everything lost wants to be found." For the rest of the night, we stayed near the deck window, keeping watch. The fog thickened, swallowing the horizon again. But in the distance, faint shapes moved, outlines of masts, the faint shimmer of sails. Each time the light turned near them, I stopped it, waited, then let it pass. By dawn, they were gone. I didn't log the event officially. The manual had no section for this, no procedure for apparitions in fog. I simply wrote in my personal notebook, 4:12 a.m., blue light sighted, ship-shaped, moved without current, did not respond to sonar, obeyed Rule 4. That day, Marcus was quieter than usual. He didn't speak during breakfast, just stared at the sunlight hitting his coffee mug. "What happens if someone ignores the rule?" I finally asked. He looked up slowly. "You'll see what they saw, and once you do, you won't see anything else again." He stood and walked out to the deck, leaving me with my questions. That evening, the fog rolled in early. I sat by the window again, listening to the waves. A soft glow shimmered far out on the water, smaller than before, slower. For a moment, I thought it was just moonlight reflecting off the swell, but when the beam of the lighthouse turned away, the glow remained, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat beneath the waves. I wrote one line in my journal. Rule 4, never turn the light toward the dead ships. The sea keeps their course, and it doesn't need help finding the shore. By the second night, curiosity got the better of me. The official records told almost nothing about the dead ships, but the private logbooks, those left by previous keepers, were full of them. Every few decades, the same words appeared in different hands. Blue light, silent sails, do not engage. I spread the old journals across the messroom table. The pages smelled of salt and machine oil. One entry dated 1941 stopped me cold. Saw her again tonight, same outline, same burnished hull. Identified markings, USS Helena. Helena, my grandfather had served on a ship by that name. It went down near the Solomon Islands in the Second World War. The official story was simple: torpedoed, all hands lost or rescued. But seeing that name, written here decades later, made something twist in my chest. When Marcus came in, he caught me staring at the entry. "You found one you recognize," he said. It wasn't a question. "My grandfather," I admitted. "He was on the Helena. How would this keeper have known that name?" Marcus set his mug down and studied the log. "Maybe he didn't. Maybe the sea did." He took a slow breath. "You need to understand, these ships don't belong to any one time. They drift between memories. They show the form that means the most to whoever's watching. You see your Helena, someone else sees their own." "That sounds like imagination," he nodded. "Exactly, and that's what makes it dangerous. Because the imagination wants to believe what it sees." Later that evening, the fog returned, thicker than before. The tower lights painted it silver. I tried to focus on routine work, tightening a row of bolts along the stair rail, but my mind kept circling back to that name, the Helena, a ghost of steel and memory somewhere beyond the reach of radar. Near midnight, the radio clicked alive for an instant. No voice, just the low sound of waves breaking against a hull. Not our hull, a larger one. Then silence. Marcus looked up from the control panel. "It's beginning again." We climbed to the watchdeck. Far out in the fog, a glow pulsed slowly, the same pale blue as before. But this time, faint lines of structure appeared inside the light. Rails, a deck, the shadow of a bow number half buried in haze. I leaned forward, trying to focus. For a heartbeat, the numbers resolved. 33. My grandfather's ship had carried that number. Marcus's hand closed on my shoulder. "Don't stare, Ethan." I blinked and stepped back. The glow softened, drifting sideways, then dissolved into the mist. The water below rolled once, gently, like an exhale. Neither of us spoke for a while. The only sound was the whisper of the rotation motor. When we finally went below, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had answered that silent call. I wrote in my journal, "Maybe the sea doesn't create ghosts. Maybe we bring them with us." The next morning, I found Marcus in the radio room, polishing the brass fittings around the transmitter. He looked strangely calm. "You did well last night," he said. "You looked away." I tried to joke. "Barely." "That's enough. That's all the rule asks. You don't have to fight the sea, you just have to outweight it." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been pressing since I saw the glow. "Do you think the dead ships ever find land?" He paused, thoughtful. "I think they already did. They just didn't like what they found." The next few days passed in an uneasy calm. The fog came and went like breath, thick in the mornings, clear by afternoon, always returning by nightfall. The sea had its rhythm again, though now I could feel that rhythm inside the tower itself. The air seemed to pulse with every sweep of the light, a reminder that something vast and unseen was always near. Marcus kept busy with repairs, small things that didn't really need fixing, a habit I'd learned to recognize as his way of thinking. I spent my time cataloging the older logbooks, tracing a pattern through the years. Every sighting of the dead ships coincided with a moment of failure, a power loss, a storm, a delay in the beacon's rotation. It was as if those apparitions needed darkness to appear. When I showed Marcus my notes, he gave a small nod. They only come when the light hesitates. You think they're drawn to it? I think they remember it, he said, and that's worse. That night, as the sky dimmed, we took turns on the deck. The air was cool, the stars half hidden behind shifting fog. From up here, the sea looked like endless slate. The beam swept slowly, steady as a metronome. I was almost beginning to relax when something caught my eye. A shape, faint, shimmering, just beyond the beam's reach. It moved parallel to the light's path, keeping its distance. I focused, trying to make out details. The outline of a hull, the glint of metal, and there, faintly, a deck light, flickering blue. Marcus, I said quietly. He didn't look up from the monitor. Don't turn the light. It's closer than before. He adjusted a dial on the control board. It's testing you, they always do. They drift in, wait to see if you'll break pattern. I kept watching. The ship, if that's what it was, held steady, half hidden by fog. The longer I stared, the more I thought I could see figures moving across its deck, slow and deliberate, like people going about routine work. No sound, no splash of oars, just motion. Then something shifted. The light from the ship flickered once, then blinked in rhythm with our own beacon, perfectly timed. Marcus, I said again, it's syncing with us. He finally looked up. His expression didn't change, but his voice dropped. Then it remembers. What do we do? Nothing. Keep the pattern. Don't change a thing. The two lights, ours and theirs, continued to turn in unison for several minutes, like mirrors facing each other across an invisible distance. Then, as quietly as it appeared, the other glow dimmed and faded. When it was gone, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Marcus spoke without looking at me. You see now why the fourth rule matters. The light keeps them in the past. If you turn it on them, you remind them there's still a way forward. Would that be so bad? I asked softly. To give them direction? He met my gaze. You can't guide what's not alive anymore, Ethan. You'll only lose yourself trying. The rest of the night passed quietly. We spoke little. The fog began to thin around 3 a.m., revealing a calm, moonlit sea. The reflection of our own tower shimmered faintly on the water, clear, sharp, perfect. I stood there for a while, watching it. The reflection looked real enough to touch, but then I noticed something strange. The reflection of the beam kept turning, even when ours paused. I blinked, stepped back, and the image corrected itself. Maybe it was a trick of the eye. Maybe not. When I wrote that night's log, my hands trembled slightly. The sea remembers light, and light remembers loss. The fourth rule keeps both from meeting again. By dawn, the fog had thinned to a quiet silver mist. The world looked peaceful again, but it was the kind of peace that hides a heartbeat beneath the surface. Marcus brewed coffee, poured 2 mugs, and watched the sea without saying a word. When the sun cleared the horizon, I noticed something glinting near the rocks below the dock. Metal, small, half buried in salt foam. I went down to check. It was an old brass plate, probably from a ship's hull. The lettering had almost vanished, but one word remained clear. Helena. I turned it over in my hands. The edges were smooth, worn by decades of tide. Marcus had followed me down the steps. He took one look at the plate and said quietly, "The sea leaves reminders, never souvenirs." He didn't ask where I'd found it. Maybe he already knew. We carried it back inside, rinsed off the salt, and set it on the work table. The metal caught the light from the lantern and reflected it upward in soft ripples, almost like moving water. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Marcus said, "Every tower keeper adds one thing to the rules before he leaves. My father wrote the third. Maybe you'll write the fifth." I smiled faintly. "If I make it that long." "You will," he said, with a certainty that sounded almost like faith, "because you listen." That evening the sea stayed calm, but the air carried a different weight. Charged, expectant. The beam of the lighthouse turned smoothly through the fog, its rhythm steady and sure. Around midnight, Marcus suggested we take one last reading before turning in. When I leaned over the console, the sonar screen flickered. For a moment it showed nothing but static. Then a faint line appeared, something long and narrow, approaching slowly from the west. "Another ship?" I asked. "Maybe," Marcus said, "or maybe just a reflection." The blip faded, then returned, closer. A second later, a low sound drifted through the fog, metal on water, deliberate and slow. We went to the observation deck. Out beyond the beam's reach, a faint blue glow shimmered across the waves. This one looked smaller, more complete than the others, its shape almost solid. I could make out railings, a mast, the curved outline of a bow. Marcus reached for the control lever. "Don't move the light," he warned. "I won't," I said, though my hands were trembling. We watched as the apparition drifted nearer, quiet and graceful, until it stopped within a few hundred yards of the rock. Then, for just a heartbeat, I saw figures on its deck, silhouettes against the blue haze. They didn't wave, didn't shout. They only stood there, as if waiting. And then I saw him, a man at the helm, tall, broad-shouldered, a posture I knew from old photos, my grandfather. I took an involuntary step forward. Marcus caught my arm. "Ethan, don't!" I swallowed hard. "He's just standing there." "He's not. You are." The words hit like a cold wave. I looked again, and the shape had changed. The figure was still there, but the face was blurred, the edges fraying like smoke. The entire ship began to thin, its blue light dissolving into strands that curled upward into the mist. As it vanished, the lighthouse beam swung past, not toward it, but across the empty water, and for an instant, the glow caught the brass plate on the table below, sending a small flash back toward the sea. Marcus's voice was quiet. It saw its own reflection. "That's enough." When the light came full circle again, the ocean was empty. We stood in silence until the sound of the waves steadied. Then Marcus said, "That's the truth behind the fourth rule. The light isn't only for the living. It holds the past where it belongs." I nodded slowly. The realization settled over me like calm after a storm. The light wasn't a weapon or a warning. It was memory, disciplined by duty. Before I turned in that night, I wrote one last entry for the day. Rule 4. Never turn the light toward the dead ships. They already know the way home. The keeper's job is to remind the living where the line ends. When I set down the pen, the tower felt still again. The beam turned, slow and sure, marking time across the sleeping sea. Somewhere beyond the fog, I imagined the ghosts of ships fading into dawn, grateful to be left unlit. The ocean was calm again. Not silent, not ominous, just calm, in the way the world feels right before change. The air carried the smell of rain, though the sky was clear. Seabirds circled high above, the first I'd seen in weeks. For the first time since arriving, I realized the sea could be beautiful without asking anything in return. It had been 94 days since I came to St. Helena Lighthouse. Marcus said the supply ship would arrive soon, weather permitting. That word, soon, had begun to lose its shape out here. But for once, it didn't sound uncertain. It sounded like something finishing the way it should. He was quieter lately, not distant, just thoughtful. Sometimes I'd find him standing by the glass, not watching the sea, but watching the reflection of the tower itself, as if to remind himself that the light still reached him too. That morning we did one last systems check. Everything was stable, power cells at full charge, lens rotation smooth, backup generators running clean. The tower's heartbeat was steady. When we finished, Marcus poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed me one. "You've done good work, Ethan," he said, "better than most." "Guess I had a good teacher." He smiled faintly. "You had a patient one." We stood there in the quiet hum of machinery, both knowing the end of our rotation meant more than leaving a job. For me, it felt like leaving a version of myself I'd only just begun to understand. "What happens now?" I asked. "You go home," he said simply. "And when the next one comes, you leave the light on." He turned toward the window. "That's the last rule, not written anywhere but the most important one. Leave the light on for whoever comes after. Doesn't matter who they are or why they came. You give them a light to find their way." It wasn't about superstition anymore. It wasn't even about danger. It was about connection. The thread of human presence stretched across time and salt and isolation. The same light that had saved ships for a century was still saving people like us from losing ourselves. That night, the fog rolled in again, soft and silver. The beam cut through it like a warm hand parting a curtain. Marcus went to bed early, leaving me with the last watch. I walked up to the top deck. The air smelled of rain and rust and faint electricity. From up here, the sea looked infinite, dark, glassy, dotted with the reflection of stars. I thought about all the rules. Keep the light alive. Don't watch the waves too long. Ignore the voices. Never turn the light toward the dead ships. And now, leave the light on. 5 rules. Simple on paper, but each one earned through trial and silence and wonder. Somewhere below, the generator clicked over to its secondary line. A small sound, but steady, comforting. I leaned on the railing and whispered into the wind, "For the next keeper." The fog shifted. For a moment, I thought I saw a shape in it. A small boat, maybe, cutting through the mist toward the dock. The beam swept across the water, found the outline, and held it for half a breath before moving on. When I looked again, it was gone. But somehow, I didn't feel alone anymore. The following morning, clouds gathered low over the water, thin as silk. The forecast said clear skies, but the horizon looked like it was holding its breath. I could feel that quiet pressure again, the sense that the sea itself was waiting for something. Marcus was already awake. He'd packed his duffel, folded with the neat precision of someone who had done it many times before. He moved around the small kitchen in silence, making coffee, checking cupboards, wiping down counters that didn't need cleaning. "You're leaving today," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "The relief crew's due this afternoon. They'll take you back on the supply boat." I felt the words land heavier than I expected. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "I stay, another rotation, maybe 2. I've never been much good on land." It made sense, yet it stung. For weeks, I'd thought of the lighthouse as something we carried together. Now I realized it had always carried him. Before noon, the fog thickened again. The radio crackled with the supply vessel's coordinates, still several miles out. Marcus adjusted the antenna, then pulled a small envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. "For when you're back on shore," he said, "don't open it here." The envelope was thin, worn at the corners. On the front, in his steady handwriting, were 4 words: "For the next keeper." I started to speak, but he lifted a hand. "Just promise me you'll pass it on. Doesn't matter to whom. Just someone who listens." I nodded. We spent the rest of the afternoon finishing small tasks that didn't matter but felt important. Tightening bolts, logging fuel levels, polishing the lens one last time. When the supply boat's horn finally sounded, the air inside the tower shifted. The sound echoed through the stairwell like a closing chapter. At the dock, the captain waved from the deck. I turned to Marcus. "You sure you're staying?" He nodded once, firmly. "Someone has to keep the light." The wind picked up, cold and steady. I hesitated, then offered my hand. He shook it, his grip strong and certain. "Remember the 5th rule," he said. "Leave the light on," I repeated. As I climbed aboard the boat, I looked back. Marcus was standing at the railing, one hand resting on the guardrail, the other shading his eyes. The beam of the lighthouse turned behind him, cutting through the mist in perfect rhythm. 45 seconds on, 45 off. Each rotation caught the edge of his silhouette until the fog swallowed it whole. The ride back was quiet, the sea was calm. But the tower's lights stayed visible for a long time, blinking, turning, breathing, a heartbeat made of metal and duty. I reached into my jacket pocket and touched the envelope. The paper was warm from my hand, faintly smelling of salt. I didn't open it. Some things are meant to wait until the next journey. The mainland looked strange after so long. Color itself felt too sharp, the red of roofs, the green of trees, the flash of traffic lights. Every sound seemed hurried, layered, impatient. The city breathed a different rhythm from the sea's slow pulse I'd learned to match. I checked into a small inn near the harbor, a place with salt-stained windows and the smell of coffee strong enough to fill the halls. That night, the quiet in my room was the hardest part. No generator hum, no slow rotation of light cutting the dark. Just silence. Steady and absolute. The envelope lay on the table beside my bed. I'd turned it over in my hands all day, running my thumb along its seams. Now, under the yellow lamplight, I finally opened it. Inside was a single folded page and a small brass key. The paper was thin, the handwriting precise. "To whoever reads this next, the light is older than the tower, older than the rules. It isn't a machine, not really. It's a promise, one that moves from keeper to keeper. The sea doesn't want us to master it. It just wants us to remember it. Every man and woman who served here left something of themselves in the beam. That's why it still feels alive. You'll hear echoes because memory never dies quietly. But if you keep the rhythm, it learns to rest. The key is for the lower hatch, 3rd floor beneath the generator. When the next keeper comes, show them the compartment. Inside, you'll find every rule ever written. Don't add to them unless you've earned one. And if the day comes when no one answers the call to keep the light, leave it burning until it burns itself out. The world will still need to see it, even if it's just a ghost of what was." M. Shahale. I read it twice, then set it down. The words didn't feel heavy. They felt true. like the last line of a story that doesn't really end. The key gleamed faintly in the lamp's glow, its teeth worn smooth. I could almost imagine Marcus writing the letter, his hand steady, his expression calm. He'd known I'd come across it sooner or later. Maybe he knew the light would call me back too. I slept little that night. The sounds of the city, horns, footsteps, laughter, kept pulling me half awake. Sometime before dawn, I stepped outside onto the balcony. The horizon was just beginning to brighten, a thin silver line over the dark water, and far out, faint but real, the beam from St. Helena still turned. It was strange, seeing it from this distance. All those miles away, the light still reached me, 45 seconds on, 45 seconds off, like a pulse reminding me that somewhere out there, someone was still watching. I touched the key in my pocket and whispered the rule again. Leave the light on for the next keeper. The world didn't answer, but the sea shimmered, and that was enough. 3 years later, I went back. The contractor's letter said the station needed repairs after a winter storm. They were looking for experienced hands. I didn't even have to think before answering. The boat ride felt shorter this time. Maybe because the fear was gone, the sea looked calmer, the air warmer. I watched the horizon the entire way, waiting for that first flicker of white. When the beam finally broke through the haze, it felt less like a warning and more like a greeting. The tower was smaller than I remembered, the paint chipped, the metal steps louder under my boots. But the hum was still there, the heartbeat of the place. Inside, everything smelled the same: salt, oil, and old paper. I climbed the stairs and found the main console humming steadily. The light was running on its own, smooth and strong. Whoever had been assigned before me had kept it alive. That meant the chain was unbroken. On the work table sat a single object wrapped in cloth. I unfolded it carefully. Inside was the brass plate from the wreck, the one that bore the name Helena. Beneath it lay a folded note to E. Cole. Heard the sea got restless again. Keep her calm, you'll know what to do. M.H. No address, no date, just that. Marcus was still out there somewhere, maybe on another tower, maybe just moving with the current. Some men are built for horizons. That evening, as the sun fell behind the clouds, I took the brass key from my pocket and opened the hatch beneath the generator. The compartment was exactly where Marcus said it would be. Inside were folders, journals, and small keepsakes left by decades of keepers. Watches, photographs, bits of rope, pressed flowers. Each item had a name and a date. Each one was a heartbeat frozen in time. I added the letter Marcus had given me and closed the hatch. When the fog rolled in after midnight, the tower felt alive again. The light swept over the sea, its rhythm unbroken. I leaned on the railing, watching the beam disappear into mist, and realized something simple and vast. The rules weren't about fear. They were about respect for the ocean, for time, and for the lives that pass quietly between both. I took out my notebook and wrote the final entry. Rule 5. Leave the light on for the next keeper. You'll never meet them, but they'll know you were here by the way the light keeps time. When I set down the pen, I felt the same calm I used to hear in Marcus's voice. The sea breathed, the tower listened, and the light, faithful, patient, turned once more across the water, carrying everything we'd ever remembered. You spend enough time out here and you start to understand that the ocean isn't a monster. It isn't waiting to swallow you whole. It's just ancient. It remembers everything, every word, every life, every light that ever tried to guide someone home. That's what the lighthouse really is. Not a tower, not a job. It's a conversation between those who came before and those still brave enough to answer. When I first arrived, I thought the rules were about survival, but they weren't. They were about faith. Faith that the light will always reach a little further than the dark. Faith that even if no one ever sees your face or knows your name, the light still matters. Sometimes late at night I still hear the ocean calling, but it doesn't sound lonely anymore. It sounds grateful. And when the beam turns across the water, I like to imagine that somewhere, miles away, another keeper is watching the same glow and smiling, because the truth is, none of us really own the light. We just borrow it for a while, keep it steady, and pass it on. So if you ever find yourself out there, lost, drifting, unsure where the shore is, look for the light. And when you find it, remember to leave it burning for the next soul who needs it. This is Ethan Cole, signing off from St. Helena Lighthouse. 5 rules kept, 5 stories told, and 1 light still turning. If this story reached you, if you felt something in it, subscribe, share it, and keep the light going, because stories like lighthouses only matter when they're seen.